Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tough Topics, the show where we discuss subjects that are challenging but key to moving us forward. I'm your host, Vonny Sweetland, and today we're shifting the spotlight to the Green Party, who federally has had a baffling year, to put it mildly. Now, former leader Annamie Paul has described her time in the party as the worst period in her life. If you've been watching the headlines as of late, you know that Miss Paul not only stepped down as leader of the party, but ripped up her Green membership as well. In the country's recent federal election, the Greens achieved a disappointing 2% of the total vote. So, with cries of prejudice, a lack of internal support for the first Black Jewish leader of a major Canadian party, and declining poll numbers, is the federal Green trajectory an indication of what's to come for the provincial Greens ahead of 2022? Here to discuss is Provincial Green Party Deputy Leader and 2022 candidate for Beaches East York, Abhijeet Manay. Good morning, Abhijeet. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Vonny. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Well, look, I'm not going to mince words here. I think what's going on with the federal party, as far as the Greens go, is certainly concerning. What's going on with your federal counterparts?
Yeah, I mean, it is something that's been taking place very publicly, as you mentioned, over the span of a couple of years now.
Yeah.
But basically, I think what it reflects is a greater problem that exists not just in the Green Party and not just in the environmental movement, but also in Canadian politics in general, which is this idea of systemic racism that's ingrained, right? Which is something that we need to tackle at a systemic level. Like individuals obviously are being individual careers, individual lives are being destroyed by these systemic problems that exist. So what we're seeing at the federal level is obviously the federal party, our federal cousins. We need to encourage them to do better and to obviously rise up from whatever has happened. But essentially, they have to do some very keen introspection as well as understanding what went wrong and then make changes to the structures and the governance structures, especially of the party, and make sure that those are fixed so that future leaders don't have to face the same things.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to be honest here. I think the party brass has really shot themselves in the foot. You've even got former Green leader Jim Harris, from an identity standpoint, who is a white male, coming out and saying Miss Paul's cries of racism are false and she's just pulling the race card. So to me, they've embattled their own leader in a lot of internal strife ahead of a consequential election and essentially proved that they were fine to put personal feelings ahead of party. So my question for you, I guess, is that a recipe for disaster? And if it is, does that concern you provincially? Because I know with parties, sometimes the same people who are in the federal coffers are also helping out on the provincial level as well. Are you nervous about that?
So no, firstly, no, I'm not nervous because the provincial party is completely different from the federal party in both its governance structures as well as the people involved. Mike Schreiner is the leader of the Ontario Green Party, and he's been a phenomenal advocate for those exact systemic changes, including within the Green Party of Ontario. We've made specific decisions to make sure that all people who feel like they want to enter politics and who are representative of what Ontario actually looks like feel welcome within the Ontario Green Party. One of the things we've done to back our talk is to actually put in specific actions, such as we have a separate fund set aside for equity deserving candidates, including myself, a person of color, people from the LGBTQ community, women, and just marginalized groups who have been underrepresented in politics. We have a separate fund set up so that candidates from those groups have the financial supports in place. Because and the other thing also is we know that when you ask a white male to run for politics, you just have to ask once or twice and then they say yes. If you ask a person of color, if you ask a woman, then you have to ask 7 times before she says yes. And you ask a person of color, and if there are, a woman person of color, then it's about 12 times or 13 times before they say yes. Wow. So we've made those decisions, made sure that our organizers are going and being persistent, making sure that we recruit candidates who reflect Ontario.
That's
So
amazing.
the federal and the provincial Greens are very different beasts in that regard. And I'm not worried about the Ontario Greens because Mike Schreiner has been doing such a phenomenal job at Queen's Park.
We're back with Deputy Leader of the Provincial Green Party and candidate for Beaches East York, Abhijeet Manay. We were just chatting a little bit about diversity and the differences between the provincial and federal Green Party. Now, while we're still on the topic of diversity, what can provincial Greens say to voters, Abhijeet, about what they are planning to do to support and embrace communities of color at a time when the federal counterparts seem to have done anything but? I know you touched on this just now, but outside of just people who are looking to run, what kind of policies are the provincial Greens hoping to enact?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Vonny. If you look at two of our plans that we've released our affordable housing paper or affordable housing plan, as well as our climate action plan. And in both of them, marginalized groups are very high on the list of things that we want of groups that we want to make sure are cared for, as well as looked at in a special way because they're facing some special challenges. So, for example, in the affordable housing paper, we have made sure that a lot of marginalized groups, including low-income groups, are really struggling when it comes to housing because they don't have the intergenerational wealth, right? That a lot of other folks do to even, like go to the bank of mom and pop, right? For the down payment to the house. So what we've said is we've set aside a certain 20% of all housing units be qualified under the affordable housing quota. So we will make sure that every municipalities will have that ability, basically just get out of the way of the municipal governments to be able to enact legislation such as that. Another thing, obviously, is also our climate plan. In the climate plan, we recognize that people of color, people in racialized communities, new immigrants, people in low-income areas, or even younger folks are the ones who are disproportionately more affected by climate change. And so what we've done is made sure that we've set aside $16 billion of new funding specifically to target communities of marginalized groups, including Indigenous peoples, by the way, who will be working in partnership with for conservation of 25% of Ontario's land and waters.
That's amazing. And I think I remember reading a report that said most people, particularly millennials and Generation Z, who are looking to purchase homes need somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 from the bank of mom and dad just in order to successfully buy a home. And of course, we know that the reality is not everybody has that opportunity. So do you think these steps are really going to help with home ownership for young people who are looking to enter the market?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if you look at our housing plan, it's been deemed the best housing plan by many different media gurus and media houses. Both CBC News, The Agenda, everyone has called it a masterclass plan. And I encourage your viewers to go check it out. Go to Ontario Green Party Housing Plan, just Google it, and you'll find it because it's not going to be there's not going to be one silver bullet that's going to solve it all. That's why we have a variety of different things that are going to be tackling this issue. But yeah, absolutely. One of them is making sure that people have enough capital or set aside a certain amount of units that will make it accessible for them to enter the market.
Right. And, there's a lot to unpack here because when you look at affordable housing, we also know that in places like the GTA, we've been in a less than 1% vacancy rate for a very long time. You've got people in the middle of the market who are trying to find deeply affordable units, but they can't because they simply don't exist. So I would agree with you. I think it's tricky to have a one-size-fits-all solution to this when there are so many active and moving parts.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, right? Like we need to make sure that there are, a carrot and a stick, right? So we need to make sure that there are taxes in place so that, vacancy taxes so that people aren't keeping apartments just as an investment, but also at the same time, we need to make sure that people have the incentives, especially, boomers and people of the older generation have the incentive to downsize as well, right? Because many of them, when I was canvassing out in Beaches East York, I was having a conversation with someone who said that she wants to retire and she wants to downsize her, huge house. But when she sells the house, what can she afford to buy? Which is, somewhere in the same local area. So those problems exist as well, which is why we're suggesting, if you want to downsize, you can do it in your own house. We are making sure that people have the ability to build duplexes or triplexes out of their own houses, which will increase the supply of housing, at the same time allowing them to downsize in their own homes and
That's
in their
amazing.
own
I think it's really important to have a multi-tiered approach. We'll pick up right where we left off just after these messages. Shifting to the 2022 provincial election, Abhijeet, you've been quite vocal on social media about the Ford government and where you think the province should be going on a number of issues. Now, the one that caught my attention was your disapproval of the increase to minimum wage. You said that $15 is not a livable wage, which I agree with because we've spoken off of air about this. But my question then is it fair to lash out at the provincial Conservatives over this when you've got a federal Liberal Party spending money like a trust fund, driving up the cost of living, making things more expensive for Ontarians, and a provincial Liberal Party who ran the show for 15 years already and, in many people's opinion, dropped the ball themselves? Can we point the finger at the Ford Conservatives without laying blame at all of the other parties too?
Absolutely not. No, I completely agree in that sense that this is not just specifically this allegation is not specifically thrown at the feet of the Ford government. It is obviously something that's been happening for a long, long time, including, as you mentioned, the 15-year-old provincial Liberal government. Both those governments work in ways that are very similar sometimes, and so which is why I think the problem is more systemic again, which is why I think we need more Greens and more parties in general in our legislature, which is why I've always even advocated for proportional representation or some form of electoral reform to our current broken system, which makes sure that it's basically just flipping between red and blue, and sometimes an orange in there, But basically what we need is a new paradigm of how we govern, because currently what's happening between the flip-flop that happens is essentially some policies stay the same and they keep on getting worse. But then sometimes when a new government comes in, they just completely scrap whatever the old government was doing and you start from zero. What happens when you have minority governments or more cooperation between parties is that those programs that have been existing and have been working for people stay put and ideology doesn't get in the way. So that's why I've been always advocating for a proportional representation. When it comes to a livable wage, yeah, we absolutely agree. To live in the GTA, you need somewhere around $22 to have a livable wage, and $15 just isn't going to cut it. But the cost of living going up, yeah, absolutely is tied to many of the external reasons that we know of. But at the same time, which is why we've also been advocating for something like a universal basic income, which would also help people achieve their full potential in Canadian economy.
Right. And for the folks who might say a UBI, universal basic income, is not fiscally responsible and is just not possible without causing other issues in the economy, what would you say to them?
I would say, look at the research, look at what the pilots have shown us. Every single time when there's been a pilot or some sort of study done on UBI or an extensive adaptation of the universal basic income, it's always proved that economically, it actually helps the economy because you're basically putting in such an influx of cash, which will drive up jobs, which will drive up businesses, which in turn helps the economy. So I know it seems counterintuitive. It's like, where are we going to get all this money from then? Basically, the idea is if you give people money, they will invest it in themselves. They will invest it in the economy, and then they will invest it to become either entrepreneurs or, get that job that they always wanted. So go to school. So it just basically goes back to the economy and helps it grow. In terms of studies, I would encourage everyone to look at the Finland study and even the basic income pilot that was happening in Ontario before Mr. Ford canceled it. But everywhere, and basic income, by the way, is a conservative idea. It started out as a conservative idea, which is still advocated by former conservatives like Hugh Segal. So please go look at it and give it a more ideologically detached look, because it is a good idea.
Right. And is this something that we can afford to do right now in the midst of a pandemic that has caused so much financial strife? We know that we're stretched very thin. We see the federal government is in a lot of debt as it stands. Is this something that in a perfect world could be enacted right now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's different ways to pay for it. There's you can go to ubiworks.ca and just go to their page where they list out 8 different ways of how we can pay for the UBI without really hurting Canadians. There's also in terms of fiscal responsibility, it is, I think, the most fiscal responsible thing to do.
So look, Greens have done a great job bringing environmental action to the forefront, and we now see every single major party, both federal and provincial, adopting strong Green positions. Abhijeet, do you take credit for that in some ways and say, great, look at what we've done, we're responsible for this? Or do you in some ways say, damn, we might have just talked ourselves out of a job?
Yeah, no, I definitely say that we take credit for it, because that is, that was one of the goals of the founding of the Green Party, was to move what's called the Overton window, right? Basically, what is acceptable political debate. And we've effectively done that. Well, the NDP and the Liberals and even the federal Conservatives now all have a climate plan. But obviously, I think walking the walk is a different thing than talking the talk, right? Yeah. The Liberals and the NDP love to say that their policies are green now, but there's some very real systemic failures that are happening when the Liberals say that they want to effect climate action, and then they go ahead and buy a pipeline. Federally, Jagmeet Singh has supported pipelines as well. In BC, the NDP government is cutting old growth forests. In Ontario as well, Andrea Horwath and Stephen Del Duca, both the Liberals and the NDP, have supported Line 5, which will, if it ever leaks, will contaminate Lake Erie. So there's a difference between what you say and then what you do. So that is exactly why we still need the Green Party to be able to hold these other parties to account, because we're the only ones that are talking about the actual actions. Yeah. If you look at our climate plan compared to, what the NDP called the most ambitious climate plan in Ontario's history, you will look that there's nothing about urban sprawl. There's nothing about
Are you essentially then saying that these other parties are piggybacking off of the Green Party and using this platform to further themselves when in fact they don't have the action to back it up?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying, because what they have in their plans are half measures, and half measures are not going to get us there to where we need to effectively combat the climate crisis. What we need are actual tangible actions that we've outlined in our plan to make sure that Ontario can become a green economy superpower, right? We want people to be able to, if I was talking with someone in rural Ontario who's saying, are you going to take away my F-150? I'm like, no, I'm going to give you an electric F-150 that's made in Ontario.
But do we have the ZEV infrastructure to support those type of purchases? That's something I've always said.
Absolutely. So what we have in Ontario is a very unique opportunity because we have the expertise from mining to manufacturing and the ability to run those supply chains, which are local and made in Ontario, to become, again, a green economy superpower in North America. Right. We actually have everything right in place. And all
to create the zero emission vehicle infrastructure to be able to sustain what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And all we need is a government who supports that industry.
Got it. Well, look, 60 seconds, Abhijeet. What are the provincial Greens selling to Ontarians ahead of the 2022 election? Why should they vote for you in Beaches, East York? And why should they make Mike Schreiner their premier?
If you want to live in a world where everything is 15 minutes, you can walk to your favorite restaurant, your favorite movie theater, your favorite grocery store, 15 minutes. If you want to make sure that the food, land, and water that you live around is protected, if you want to make sure that we become a green technology giant in North America, then you need to vote Green. Because even if we are not part of, even if we don't become the government, even if there's 3, 4, 5 Green MPPs holding the next minority government to account, we can make massive changes to the way we live in Ontario.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been real great having you, and I wish you lots of luck as you're out on the campaign trail.
Thank you so much, Vonny.
No problem. Well, for those of you who joined us at home, thank you to you as well. Again, this is Tough Topics, the show where we discuss the subjects that are challenging but are key to moving us forward. I'm Vonny Sweetland, and thank you again.
Hi, my name is Dean Allison. I'm the host of the Hill Update. Come join me each week as we look at a number of different issues. We can look at some of the legislation that's being passed on Parliament Hill and what that actually means to your life. We can talk to people in terms of what is going on in constituency issues and what may affect their lives. And then we're going to bring in guests from all walks of life to talk about a number of different issues and help try to explain them a little bit better. So come on by, join us, check your local listings. Love to see you there.